The main land use type of a parcel of real estate, parcel of land, has an impact on how expensive that land is to survey. And I oftentimes have conversations with potential clients about how much it costs to survey a particular piece of property and why does it cost as much as it does. People are often surprised at how much it costs. And one of the things that goes into that cost calculation that I have to make as a private land surveyor is the type of land use that I'm dealing with. And what I want to do is explain to you kind of the four main types of land use that we look at from a cost perspective on a boundary survey, and explain some of the challenges that are unique to each of those land types. And this is important because people call me and they'll say, I need a survey. How much? How much to get a boundary survey? $1 billion. Like, I don't know. I need more information than that, right? I tell people it's like calling your auto mechanic and saying, how much to fix my car? He has no idea, right? He needs more information. Is it making a noise? Is it grinding? Is there a vibration? You know, does it not start? Is it on fire? Like, he needs some more information. He probably needs to look at the car before he can give you a price, right? So when people call and ask me how much, Landon, is it for a boundary survey, I need some information. And one of the things I'm going to look at is I'm going to try to determine which of these four main land use types does the property fall into. So here's the four types that I look at, main land use types that I look at when I'm going to estimate the cost of a boundary survey. One is rural. And when I say rural, I mean either agricultural or what I call wild, right? Undeveloped. Okay. Second is suburban. Okay. You can think about tract homes. It's like the neighborhood I live in is suburban. Okay. And then the third is urban. So kind of dense urban core. And this first one is newly developed dense urban. Okay. And then the fourth is same thing, urban core, but older urban core. So like downtown Stockton would be an example of an area that, it's over 100 years old, might even be a couple hundred years old, urban core, right? Like an old downtown. So in Stockton, we have both kinds. We have a kind of dense urban core downtown, and then in the north part of town, we have an area off an 8 Mile road that's it's dense, more intense urban use, but it's newly developed. So there's two different kinds of urban land use. So as I mentioned, each of those four categories of land use has their own challenges from a boundary survey perspective. So I want to go through each one. It's not going to take long, just a few minutes, and talk about what the unique challenges are. Okay, so let's start with the challenges of surveying in rural land. So this is agricultural land, row crops, orchards, pasture land, or it could be wild land. So, we have chaparral oak woodland. In my part of California, we have pine forest, evergreen forest. We have grassland. We have swamp. So any of those types of land use. So what are some challenges? In rural land, there's almost always a lack of recent surveys. So most of that land, I'd say 90 to 95% of it hasn't been surveyed in 100 years, 150 years. And so the surveys are old. That's a problem. The monuments are old. So we're looking for some old stuff. Could be stone mounds, could be wood posts. Now, on a positive, even though the monuments are old, monument destruction isn't as much of a problem because most of this land hasn't been getting physically turned over and developed. So we can find some old monuments. I found some old stone mounds and things like that, some old pipes. But the monuments are old. Terrain can be a big challenge. So anytime you get into rough terrain and it's hard to move around, either by vehicle or on foot, that adds to the cost of a survey. It's not just how difficult it is to move around, but trees, tall, a lot of tree cover, mountainous terrain can be hard on GPS. And it's always more expensive to do total station surveys than GPS. Almost always more expensive. So terrain can be a cost factor. Usually when we're dealing with rural land, the parcels are larger, the land holdings are larger. And so, we're covering more ground. It's more expensive to cover more ground typically on a survey. And then finally, the quality of the land records are usually poor. And that's because the land records are old. And in the old days, we just didn't do a good of a job with our land records. We do a better job now. It's just like, medical science is better now than it used to be. Okay, so those are some challenges of surveying in rural areas. What about suburban land? Okay, so suburban land has some of its own challenges. The first one I have noted here is landowners and local governments like to destroy monuments in suburban areas. So we pave over a lot of monuments. When you build fences and walls or additions to your house, a lot of time monuments get dug up. I just found a 2-inch iron pipe on a boundary survey in a suburban area that was under a concrete footing for a new fence. So one challenge in suburban areas is we have a lot of monument destruction. The other challenge we have in suburban areas is because the land is more frequently turned over and developed, but still of low value, people build a lot of stuff without the benefit of a survey. Fences, walls, driveways, sidewalks, buildings, sheds, garages, wells, septic fields, you name it. And a lot of times because the physical improvement is cheaper than the cost of a survey, they just build the improvement. And so that creates problems when we go in to do a boundary survey because we, not always, but on a fairly regular basis in suburban areas, we find that the physical features, the fences and the walls, the driveways, even the buildings sometimes are not in the right parcel. They either violate a building setback or they physically encroach over the property line. I had a call from a gentleman in Oakdale a couple weeks ago. He realized the neighbor's house was about 45 feet into his property, and we're pretty sure there was a conflict there in the two neighboring surveys. And the guy, when the houses got built, nobody got a survey, so they didn't see the problem. So that happens in suburban areas. And the other thing that comes up in suburban areas is most of those parcels are created by subdivision. And what a lot of folks don't realize is when we go to survey in an area like that, we often have to survey either the entire block or the entire subdivision to properly calculate where those boundary lines go. And it has to do with the way we have to distribute excess or shortage. We have to do that equally among the parcels usually. And so that I might not just have to survey your parcel boundary. I might have to survey the boundary of the whole subdivision. So that can add a cost. All right, what about surveying in urban lands, newly developed dense urban areas? What are some challenges there? The main thing is traffic and congestion makes it difficult to actually execute the field survey. If we're in what we call urban canyons where we have really tall buildings, it can be hard to use GPS. It can be almost impossible to use GPS, so that adds to the cost. So that the field surveying part of it gets more difficult. Usually in newly developed urban areas, it's easier to find monuments, so that's a pro. That offsets some of the cost, but it's a logistical challenge to get that field work done. And new construction will often destroy monuments. So we have the same problem in new urban cores that we have, dense urban areas that we have in suburban areas, which is as people build stuff, they blow out monuments. And that happens. People build multi-million-dollar condo towers in the Bay Area and blow monuments out when they do their construction. So you wouldn't think that people would do that, but it happens. Okay, how about old urban areas? So in older urban areas, like old downtown Stockton is an example. So you have dense, high-value land use, but most of it hasn't been surveyed in a long, long time, or the original surveys were a long time ago. We have the same traffic and urban canyon problems that we have in newly developed urban areas, but we have some additional challenges. One is the quality of the land records is poor, again, because they're old land records. A lot of those older urban areas lack monuments because a lot of monuments weren't set to begin with, or the monuments have just been destroyed over time. So that's a contrast between old urban and new urban. Old urban, we're probably going to find fewer monuments. And then in older urban areas, we often have problems with encumbrances, encroachments, like in suburban areas. Not as much because the land is worth more, so it does get. You're more likely to have a survey before things get built in an old urban area than in a suburban area. But the flip side of that is when you do have an encroachment, it's worth a lot more money. So the consequences are less likely to have an encroachment, but the encroachments are more expensive. Okay, so they call that a less likely failure, but a higher consequence of failure. So encroachments are a challenge. I was just looking at something in downtown Stockton, and because of the way the surveyor drew the map, there could be a 10-foot question on where the property line's at. Some really expensive real estate could be 10 feet over a property line. So it does happen. Because the land records are old, they often are, not often, but they're occasionally in conflict with one another, as people layer stuff on top of each other and abut different land records to each other. You'll get easements that overlap when they shouldn't, or property lines that overlap when they shouldn't. So that's a problem. So to summarize, the land use type can have a huge impact on the cost of your survey. So I need to understand when you call me to get a cost on a boundary survey, what am I dealing with? Is it rural land? Is it suburban land? Is it newly urban developed? Or is it old urban development in an old downtown? I need to be able to answer those questions to properly price your survey.